Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market.
Good morning and welcome to podcast 11, and thank you for joining the David and David on Real Estate.
Good morning, David.
Good morning, David. How are you today?
So easy to remember your name somehow.
Yeah. Well, the month of June, so I bet you guys are busier now than you have been for the rest of the year.
Yeah, for sure. Many years, June is our busiest month for closings, and this is certainly no exception. It's our busiest month so far for the year, and I'd be surprised if we surpass it by another month. So everybody's feeling it in our office right now. Everybody's working hard, busy. We got to close things on time, so everybody's working extra, getting it all done. So it's a busy time, but everybody in our office knows to expect it. And we know we have some quieter months generally in the winter months than we do in the spring and summer months. So it's a little bit cyclical, and even this year with COVID's no exception, but we're quite busy. So we don't complain when we're busy. We complain when we're not busy, right, David?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's always a great sign of how strong the real estate market is and really what's happening out there. And, people are transacting, people are closing, people are finding opportunities. And, it's great to see that. And I always enjoy, hearing that from your office as well. We see it too. We're on the front lines, but knowing that, the real estate market in general is really busy is always a great sign.
Yeah, no, it's a very active market. A lot of the signs we're seeing are for a pretty traditional, normal, like June type of market, heading into July. So, people are out more, people are more, the weather's good. People have one vaccine, some have two vaccines. There's a lot more activity going out. Everything's opened up a little bit. And I think, people are out there making plans, and I think it should continue through the summer, the way things are looking.
I agree. Just wanted to give everybody a brief market overview as well. So I'm actually noticing that in the last week and a half, we're actually seeing a little bit of an uptick in prices and activity and in buyer demand. So for the last 8 weeks in a row, we saw the market peak and we saw the market trending downwards. And now for the last week and a half, I'm actually noticing a little bit of an uptick. So, great to see that, I think with the vaccines, I think with the warmer weather, I think with people feeling a little bit more comfortable with the stay-at-home order and some time passing, I think our people are going out there again. And people have recognized that the market did soften a little bit from the peak over the last 8 weeks. And I think people are getting back out there. People are looking at real estate again. We're seeing people list a little bit more and people becoming more comfortable with that situation. So good sign for the market.
Yeah, no, it's a very good sign. And I think, always the market settles down when there's more supply on the market. And, it just stops some of the frenzy and the multiple bidding and all that stuff. So it seems like it's calmed down a little bit from that point of view. We've talked about that recently too. But we're far from what we were in. If you remember, I think it was 2017. We were in a situation where it was like, agents, all you guys were saying to people, just go ahead and buy whatever you want. We have no problem selling your property. You could buy first and sell later, right?
It was, that was a really crazy time. And as a professional, it's really hard to give your client advice because nobody really has a crystal ball. You can really just deal with what's happening right in front of you at the time. But, I was telling my buyers at the time that not to go out and not to really look because prices were going so crazy in 2017, right? And then in July, I remember I called all my buyers and I literally said to them, hey, now is the time. And that was my busiest July in the history of me having my real estate license. I think I did like 8 transactions in a matter of 3 weeks, just because the market was softening and there were opportunities there finally. And, a lot of the people bought, they had to sell. So it was just the right time. And the buyers that worked with me, David, let me tell you, like, they really benefited. They got properties like in some situations $300,000 cheaper than they were selling a couple months before in the high, right? So, giving that advice to the buyers and giving that guidance and helping them navigate those situations is so paramount. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why we go out of our way and we, really teach our agents here at Sutton Summit Realty to really know the market, know the trends, know exactly what's going on, have a really good pulse on really what's happening out there. And our market really changes on a daily basis. On a daily basis, I feel that, I feel the trends and where they're moving and what people are feeling and where the money is flowing. And it's so important to have that information to be able to make the right decisions.
Yeah, it was a pretty unusual time. I remember coming to your office back then to do a seminar. Well, in the days we could do live seminars for it. And we called the seminar Musical Chairs in the Real Estate Market.
I remember that.
Remember that? Because what happens when the music stops? Like, we've all played musical chairs, the music stops and there isn't enough chairs for everybody. And that's the market we're in all of a sudden, because everybody's, you can buy before you can sell, you'll have no problem selling. And all of a sudden the market changed, like it's inevitable, right? It's going to change. And all of a sudden there was a bunch of people who had bought and they haven't sold yet. And now what? And everybody was panicking. What are my rights? What do I do? I got to close on a purchase. I haven't sold yet. I can't get my bridge loan. I can't get my financing. I got to have 2 properties. And we're doing all that. So we did a seminar in your office to discuss that with the agents, different strategies, and what happens when you come up to your closing date and you have to extend. And I'm dealing with one like that, right now. I got to deal with it as soon as we get off this podcast, because I have a client who did buy. Even in this market, they bought and they hadn't sold yet. And we don't have too many of them right now, but this is on the advice of an agent, not one of your agents. So that's the good news. And they're upset. Believe me, they're very upset with their agent. They're already they were talking yesterday about consulting with a litigation lawyer because they're not sure, they don't like the way their agent handled it. And I tried to calm them down on that. I don't really think the agent did anything really wrong. Maybe some of the advice wasn't good, but I don't think there was any malpractice. But they're looking at everything because they're panicking. We're a week away from closing their purchase and they haven't sold their property yet. And because they haven't sold, they can't get a bridge loan because they've gone through the lender. Says, we'll give you a bridge loan as soon as you've got a sale under contract. It doesn't matter when it's closing, but it's under contract, we'll give you a bridge loan. So now they can't get their funds together to close. So they've been saying, can we get an extension? The seller doesn't want to grant an extension right now. And the buyers have been asking for a couple of weeks. So this, a couple of weeks ago, they raised, they said, what if we don't sell? Can we get an extension right now? So there's a lot of strategies that go into granting an extension, or when you request an extension, when you're on the other side and you have to grant an extension. And I explained to them then, if you come to a seller 3 weeks before the closing and say, hey, I haven't sold yet, I don't have my financing together, I need an extension, what terms and conditions will you give me? The answer is likely to be, we're not going to do anything. We're closing on the closing date. You got 3 weeks, get your act together. That's certainly what I would be telling the other side, because as soon as you grant an extension, it takes the pressure off them, right?
And I was going to say, everything sells at a certain price, right? So the seller or the buyer in this case has gotten themselves into a messy situation because they're reluctant to decrease the price to a point where their property is going to sell. And by asking for an extension, they're not willing to let that pressure out, right? So a lot of things go into play here. You hope that the agent that they're working with gave them the right advice when they first started the process about what the value of their house is. But again, looking at the market and what has transpired in the last 8 weeks, the market did change. And a lot of the time, this is a process. Getting your house ready for a market takes time. You have to declutter, you have to prepare, you have to stage it. You might have to paint the property. All that takes time, right? So you just want to make sure that the market is the same when you first start those conversations. And as you go through that process, a good agent will update the seller and let them know, hey, Mr. Seller, I know we had this conversation. I know I gave you a figure, and it's probably not what you want to hear, but this is where we are today. And I just want you to be mindful and cognizant of that fact, and whatever decision you make in terms of buying, moving forward.
Right. And as you mentioned in previous podcasts that we've done, like it's easier for someone who's buying and selling to do it. You want to do it in the same market, right? So if you're going to be overpaying a little bit on your purchase because there's multi bids going on, the agent will say, yeah, you're paying a little more here, but on your sale, you're in the same market. You're going to get more. You should be getting more than you would in another market. So you hope it balances out, but sometimes you're in that musical chairs situation where all of a sudden, like in this case where you've probably overpaid a little bit on the purchase. You haven't sold yet. And now the market's softened a little bit. You're not getting multi offers for sure. They're dying to get one offer right now. So now they're selling at probably a fair price. Okay. But they were expecting to get more than the fair price based on the information that their agent probably gave to them and what was going on in the market at the time. So there's always that risk of buying before you sell. And then from my point of view, I got to manage their expectations too, to some extent, because you're right. Like, the pressure has to stay on them. Like they can't get that price that they probably wanted to get on the sale, but they've got to be highly motivated to sell. They have to sell. They have a closing date, right? And the seller's lawyer is going to keep saying no to us to keep the pressure on, to force them to find reasonable terms to sell on. And the other thing is, when you talk to the client, well, what's the other option? You can't get finance, can't get the bridge loan. Have they looked at getting private mortgage lending? And they had already done that through a broker and everything, but they just didn't like it because it's really expensive. So they want the perfect scenario for themselves, which is get an extension till whenever we're comfortable with the price that we're selling our house and we're happy with all the mortgage terms that we get. Unfortunately, that's not their reality right now. They're the ones that did commit to a purchase. So they've got to perhaps accept a lower price on the sale of their house. They may have to get private financing and pay a premium because it's way more expensive to get private mortgage financing. But we've got a week to close, right? And they've got to do one or the other. Yeah. So, and that's a hard thing to tell a client.
Yeah, but listen, if they get private financing, then they buy themselves a little bit more time. And they can afford to roll the dice a little bit more in terms of valuation on their house, right? And I say this all the time, like if price is an issue on a property, that means that the buyer that you're working with likes the property, right? If they fall in love with the property and they get emotionally attached to it, price becomes less of an issue. So if you look at the pool of buyers, right, you're looking for that small segment of the buyer pool where these people absolutely love your house, they have to have it, and they're willing to pay the price that you really want for your property, right? Sometimes it takes a little bit longer in that cycle to find that particular buyer, and it's okay, right? It's okay to be looking for that buyer, and by enlisting the help of a good agent, you sort through the market a lot faster to be able to connect those properties and those buyers together, right? By making sure you have the right marketing, making sure you have the right exposure, making sure you have the right description, making sure the house is staged properly, making sure it's prepped properly. All that comes into play in helping connect that property with that particular.
Right, and those are all really good points, and I think you're bang on. Like you and I didn't.
So sometimes it's not a bad strategy, and again, having the right lawyer office, having the right real estate office to be able to go through those motions is critically important.
Yeah, and you picked up on, I think, the correct position right away because you're an experienced agent and broker. You know what it is. They're better off getting the bridge financing and closing on time and buying themselves time to sell. And that's what I'm trying to explain to them too. Even though as distasteful as it is to pay the high private mortgage fees, it's a better scenario because an extension will be granted on terms, and maybe we'll get a week extension. Maybe we get 2 weeks, who knows? But there's going to be costs of getting that extension. And then there's still uncertainty. We get the end of that. Now we come up to the extended closing date, and we still may not have sold the property, and they still have to get financing. So they still might incur those same additional costs. So I think you know, we didn't discuss this before our podcast, but you're right away, you look at it, you think, oh, this is the way they should go. They should get the private mortgage lending. And I agree, like that's the way they should be going. They got to bite that bullet, close this on time. That buys them time. And I'm not even sure the terms that they're looking at, but private mortgage funding, it might be a 6-month term, might be a year term. It's not a 5-year term. It's going to be a shorter term, and that buys them some time to sell and refinance the whole thing and pay it out. And at least it avoids the risk of litigation too, because the other side could just terminate us on closing, and then their deposit's in jeopardy, and they could be liable for damages. And they'll take that position. And then they might say, by the way, we'll give you a few days extension anyways, or maybe we'll give you a week, because they can always pull the plug on them a week later, right?
And you know what, litigation is always the X factor. Like you just don't know how far it's gonna go, you know, where it's gonna end up, and how much money it's gonna cost you. And the other thing is, you really put your faith into your fate. Sorry, not your faith, but your fate into somebody else's hands. Right? Like
Right.
you lose all your decision-making ability as soon as you go through that process, because somebody else is going to start making those decisions on your behalf.
Yeah.
And that can get very dangerous and very, very expensive, right? And not to mention, I always look at everything as an opportunity cost. You only have a certain amount of hours in a day. You have a certain amount of energy of what you can do with your time. And the last thing you want to do is put that energy into going through the court system. It's just negative energy. It will suck you dry, and that's going to be the most expensive part. People don't realize it. Okay, so you go through that whole process and cost you a couple $100,000. What about the opportunity cost? How much time and energy have you lost that you could have put into your business, investing in yourself, buying properties, flipping, building, reading, investing, living life. I mean, that's the big opportunity cost here, right?
No, you're 100% correct. Like it's not something that I would want anybody to go down. Like we've talked about it before in our podcast. Like, I have nothing against litigation lawyers. They're great. But the process of litigation is hard on you. Whether you've done it before, you're doing it the first time, it's not a good experience for anybody. So that's an important factor. But I know, when we're asking for an extension, it depends which side of the fence you're on. There's no right to an extension. It's something that has to be negotiated. So if I was the seller's lawyer in this particular case, and then so even a week before closing, and they come to me requesting an extension, I would be reluctant to grant them that still. I'd say, no, you've got a week. Get your act together. You got a week. We're not closing. We're going to be ready on the closing date. You want to keep the pressure on. And then if we get closer, we might start thinking about granting it. But I don't want to grant an extension unless I see there's some reality that they have an ability to close a week later. Like, where's your mortgage commitment? Do you have a mortgage commitment? Where are you at with the sale of your house? Have you reduced the price? You'd want to see something to know that it's real.
And that's huge. I have realtors calling me all the time in exactly that same situation where they're representing the seller. And the first thing I say is, tell me about the buyer's financial situation. Have you done comparables on the house that they currently have listed on the market? Are they reasonable? Are they below? Are they above market value? Does the house present well? Have you suggested to the other agent that they stage, repaint, reposition, cancel and relist, reduce the price? Because, sometimes, and I mean, we have some amazing agents here at Sutton Summit Realty. We really do. Like, I'm so proud of the group that we have. Sometimes our agents have to be leaders and lead and show the other agents the way and help them through these tough situations, right? And I'm okay with that, because at the end of the day, we're here to work together to make sure that the transaction closes. So if my agents have to take the reins a little bit and get a little bit more involved and help the other agents see this transaction through. Sometimes that's what it takes.
Right. And that's a really important point, because not all agents are created equally, as we know, as not all lawyers are created equally. And it's sort of a peculiar concept to think that you have to go help another agent and look over their shoulder to see what they're doing. But 100% you do. You have to get involved in that. You have to go and take a look at that. And you have to see if what they're doing is real, and what their chances are. And to me as a lawyer, I need that information. I need that feedback that an agent can provide to let me know, like, should we be agreeing to an extension? Like, what are the odds, or what are the possibilities? Where are they at on potentially selling? Like, why are we giving them a week when nothing is going on or nothing's going to change? We're just going to be in the same position a week later. And if I don't have confidence that there is that activity going on, then if we do grant an extension, my terms have gone up. I want them to release the deposit monies right away on closing to the seller. Let's give the seller the money. Let's get it out of the broker's trust. Maybe we want an additional deposit from them to show that they're real and they're committed. Will they put more money in? We want all of the costs covered, obviously. We want to see a mortgage commitment. If there's, the terms that we negotiate change depending on the feedback we get from a real estate agent as to what's going on, right? So it's very valuable, and that's where we've talked before. There's a team approach on closing these things. It's us as the lawyers involved, but we have to work hand in hand with the agents. It's really important.
Dave, it's so funny. We do these all the time, and you always keep taking the words right out of my mouth. But you're absolutely right, and then the team extends to both agents working together and cooperating. Extends to the lawyer's office. Exchange. It goes beyond that to the mortgage agent. We're all a team, and we're all working to make sure that buyers and sellers property come closing date closes, and that's the transaction is successful.
Right, and that's true. Like in this particular case, as it turns out, when you dig down a little more and we talk to the mortgage broker, he says, "No, I've got them private mortgage finance. It's available to them. It's been approved. We can get it. We can get it in time for closing, but it's expensive. They just don't want to choose that yet because they're trying to exhaust all other options first, which is fair. They got to do that, but at the end of the day, that's probably their best solution. You got, if the private mortgage money is available in this case, take it. Open mortgage, 6 month, 1 year term, probably a prepayment penalty you're going to have to pay it out early. But those are smaller costs compared to defaulting, or being at the whim of a seller to impose all kinds of demands for terms of an extension, and having to put further deposits down and having to release deposits, et cetera, et cetera. So that's probably where we're going to go in this particular case. I've just got to convince them when we get off this podcast that that's their best option.
Yeah, and price is subjective. Like, expensive is a subjective term, right? Like, price reduction is expensive too, right? Price is so psychological. Mm-hmm. Minimum price reduction that you're ever going to see is $10,000. Like if you let that amount sink in, like that's a lot of money. Yeah. A private mortgage, depending on the amount, the term, like if you need private financing for 3 months, I doubt that it would cost $10,000. Like it depends on the purchase price as well, right? But if you're dealing with a condo, or you're dealing with some sort of a bridge amount, you're probably not going to be there, right? Especially if you only need it for 3, 4, 5 months. You might be close, but you might not quite be there. So that's a subjective term, right? Expensive. Right. A lot of times it's not, right? When you factor in, hey, do you need to do a $50,000 price reduction? Well, then private funds are the cheaper solution, right? Get private financing in place, hold firm to your price, make sure that the property is marketed correctly, look for that one buyer that falls in love, and try to see if you can, get a better price for your property, right? But again, just navigating that whole situation, need a strong team of people behind you that can give you the right guidance. That's the most important thing.
Right, and everybody's input is important. The agent's input, the mortgage broker's input, the lawyer's input. These are all important factors, because extensions are not such a simple thing. Oh, we need an extension, and here's the standard extension that we need. There's no such thing as that. We get into that sometimes when we're ready to close on a particular date and we just run out of time because the funding came in. So we're just extending till the next day or something like that. But everybody's ready. That's different. That's a simpler extension. But when you need an extension for a week or 2 weeks or more, when there's this uncertainty, there's a lot of strategies involved, and it's not an easy process. So you need proper guidance on that from the lawyer, who can only give that guidance in cooperation with the real estate agent, the mortgage broker, and the whole team, right? So it's always a unique situation every time one of these come up, because there's nothing standard about it. It's there's always a different reason for extensions and different situation. We have to look at it and what are we asking for? How much time do we really need for an extension? Anyways, it's always an interesting discussion. I know we wanted to get into some other stuff today too. I think you wanted to talk about rental items and things like that. So maybe we got to switch gears.
Okay, sounds good. So rental items in the property, I mean, that's always a very controversial item. And the reason I wanted to bring it up today is because there have been some situations in the past where some agents have run into some difficulties. So I thought it'd be great just to talk a little bit about that. So David, when a property is sold, let's talk about what are some of the things that are included in the sale.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing that people have to focus on, and generally they're doing that with their agent when they're looking at properties, is what is a fixture and what is a chattel. And that's really like the whole discussion, because fixtures are generally things that are attached to the property and that go with the property, and they're generally included unless they're specifically excluded in agreement of purchase and sale. Those are things that are bolted down and attached, etc. And there's always a gray area where we get into these discussions. But chattels, on the other hand, are really more commonly thought of as like the appliances and things like that, your fridge, stove, washer, dryer, things like that are movable. They're big, not easy, but they're all movable. Even they're just plugged in, but they're not fixed to the property. So things that are plugged in are generally movable, and they're considered chattels. So there's a place in a standard agreement of purchase and sale where you list the chattels that are supposed to be included. Are all the appliances supposed to be included? You describe them, and it's really important to describe them properly in an agreement of purchase and sale, so you get the right fridge and the right stove, by serial number or by description in there. But those are things that are generally included. And if there's a particular thing from the chattels that you want excluded, then you make sure you mark that in there, right? Fixtures, it sort of works the other way. It's usually fixtures stay unless there's something specifically excluding a fixture. Like typically, people would put in an agreement like that all the light fixtures would be included. Okay, and those are fixtures. They're bolted in and they're generally included. But if someone wanted the chandelier in the dining room, then they specifically have to exclude that and say, except for the chandelier in the dining room, and put that in the exclusion list. Okay, so that's important of having an agent really walk you through those things when you're on the sell side. Like, what do you want to take with you, and what do you want to leave behind? And sometimes the advice is, well, although if you want to take this, an agent might say, but you really should leave that behind because that's a good selling feature. Like that chandelier helps sell the dining room. Right. So even though you might have some attachment, you want to leave it. So maybe you want to, or exclude it originally, but if they ask for it, maybe you throw that in to make your deal. Right.
Yeah, and a lot of the times, if you do want to exclude something, I always encourage my sellers to actually remove it from the house prior to showings, right? So it just doesn't become a conversation items unless it's a big selling feature. If it is a big selling feature, then we kind of look at it on a case-by-case scenario, especially if it has a lot of sentimental meanings to the seller. But if it's not a selling feature, then I say, you know what, let's remove it, let's get it out of here, let's put it in a box, let's put it in a garage, and that way it's just a moot point, and we don't have to deal with it. And replace it with something that's going to show just as well, but that the seller doesn't have a sentimental value attached. And sometimes that's a really good strategy, and it's all part of, you know, really taking the time and prepping the house correctly before going on the market.
Yeah, and that's a key thing. And I know you guys are talking to your agents about that all the time, how to prep a house properly for sale. And it's decluttering it, you know, getting rid of some of the stuff so it shows better, but a lot of it is the staging too. And it's taking stuff out and putting other things in, whether it's pieces of furniture, whether it's certain lighting, you know, things like that. That you're clearly not going to be selling with the property because you're staging it. And I think that's great advice that you're giving people to, you know, the things that you really want to keep, don't leave it there.
Yeah.
Because if it's attractive to you, it might be attractive to the buyer too. And all of a sudden to make the deal, they're insisting on it.
Yeah. And listen, if you get the right price and, you know, has the right amount of zeros behind it, then, you know, you might be having a different conversation with your partner about that chandelier that you have an emotional connection to, and you just don't want to be put in that situation if you don't have to, right? And it's all part of the prep work. The other part of the prep work that I really encourage all my agents to do is really have a good understanding of what is a rental item in the property, right? And that's key in making sure that there's, you know, that issue is addressed with, right? And usually the hot water tanks are the big items that are rentals in most transactions. Sometimes sellers will buy them out, but a lot of times those are the rental items. But increasingly, we've seen furnaces as a rental. We've seen air conditioning as a rental item. And I always encourage all my agents to make sure that they have the correct amounts. You know, what is the monthly rental rates for those items, and then to contact whoever the leasee is, the leaseor of those items, and actually get the agreement and attach it to the listing, so that whoever is looking at the property will know exactly what the terms, what the buyout rate, and what the monthly rates of those leased items are as well.
Yeah, and that's great advice. We're seeing issues all the time come up for closing because the agents and the sellers didn't put their minds to it. You know, it's not the seller's fault, because I think that's the agent's responsibility to point those things out to them, because they can be living in their place for who knows how many years. And you ask them, are you renting your furnace? You renting your humidifier, your air conditioner, your hot water? And like, you know, you ask me, I wouldn't know off the top of my head what I own in the house and what's a rental. Because some of the rental items you're paying, you know, your monthly gas bill, and it includes your consumption, and there's something in there for your monthly rental amount. And people don't put their minds to it. But you have to put your minds to it when you're selling your property. You got to figure it out, because there's some people own some of those that equipment. And if you own it, these are fixtures, and it's going to go with the sale of the property. Some of them are pure rentals. You're paying for your water tank, and it's $19.95 a month or $29.95 a month or something. And it's pure rental. And people like that because if a problem with their hot water tank comes up, they call the company, they come in and they either fix it or they replace it, and that's it. It's not theirs. And then there's sort of the hybrid, which are these rent to own leasing scenarios for some of this equipment, where you're paying a rental amount, but you're on a contract to actually buy it out over a period of time, and you can't get out of them, you know, because you've got a contract that you're going to be, it's a lease to own, and all of a sudden you're right in the middle of it, and people aren't taking a look at that, and all of a sudden they've sold it, and they think they've sold the furnace because they own it, but turns out they only own half of it. They only paid for half. And there's another $5,000 to be paid to buy it out completely. And now they've obligated themselves to leave it behind as an owned item, which means that they have to cough up the money before closing to finish buying it out.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And that's an obligation, right? Because I think some of those rent owns are not transferable in a lot of the cases. So, and the reason companies do this is because, you know, they want a triggering event where they get paid a lump sum of money, right? And it's their way of basically saying, you know what, we know that at some point you're probably going to move. And when that happens, you know, we're going to get a windfall of a little bit of money here, right? And a lot of the times, you know, people are paying triple the cost of what an AC or a furnace should cost in those contracts. So, you know, if you're a seller or if you're a homeowner and you're looking at replacing some of these big ticket items, I realize that they're expensive. But a lot of the times it's a lot cheaper to, you know, put it on your line of credit or, you know, put it on, you know, dig deep into your savings account as opposed to getting into these leasing or rent to own contracts. They're extremely expensive. And most people don't realize how much they actually cost until they sell their house and they have to deal with what's in front of them.
Right. And then they've got to buy it out. And sometimes these lease to own contracts are also secured by the registration of something on title. So we can't close the transaction without clearing the title for the buyer. And the only way to clear the title is to pay off those contracts.
Right.
So, so that means, you know, there's going to be a cost to the seller. So if this, so that's why sellers have to know what they have, and they need their agent sometimes to help them figure it out because they don't understand it. Because if they're in the middle of one of these rent to own contracts, they have to know that they're halfway through and there's another $5,000 to be paid, and either they're going to pay it and sell an owned furnace to a buyer, or they've got to put that into the agreement of purchase and sale. They've got to disclose that it's on a rent to own. We're halfway. This is the amount that still has to be paid, and the buyer agrees to assume that rental contract, that rent to own contract, and pay whatever that monthly amount is. And they keep doing that for the next couple of years. And eventually, they will own it. But it's got to be clearly put into the agreement of purchase and sale that the buyer is going to assume that. And like you said before, you also have to find out in advance, can the buyer assume that? You got to get in touch with the company first to make sure that it is transferable, because sometimes these contracts say they're not. And then the seller has no choice but to finish paying it out, and you know, and that's a big cost that they may have not expected.
Yep, and it all goes to, you know, making sure you pre-plan and go through the whole process and go through a due diligence representing the seller. You know, I've heard of situations where the seller said, hey, listen, you know, had I known that there's going to be a $9,000 bill for paying off my furnace, I wouldn't have listed the house for sale and gone through this whole process, right? But a lot of the times after they commit to actually going through the transaction, they find out about these hidden costs. That's when people get really upset. And you know, that's why I can't stress enough that you have to kind of go through the due diligence, look at those contracts, make the phone call, get something in writing, preferably an email from Enbridge or Reliance or whoever actually owns the piece of equipment, of what the buyout amount is. Attach the contract, attach that email with the buyout amount to the agreement of purchase and sale. Make all parties initial, that everybody understands what's going on, you know, what the amounts are, what the terms are, and you know, and you have to deal with all those situations in an upfront manner.
Yeah, and look, as a lawyer, I wish that every agent had the exact advice that you just gave right now, and that type of instruction to their agents, because that's what they should be doing. That's how an agent adds value to the whole transaction. It's not just about selling a property and buying a property. It's helping them through the whole process, because nobody likes these hidden fees and these hidden costs. You know, on my end, you know, we get involved on it when there's already an issue.
Right.
Okay, the ink is already dried on the agreement of purchase and sale, sometimes, you know, weeks before we even see the contract, but now we have to find a way to close with that contract. These issues come up, you know, closer to closing, and they wouldn't come up if the agents listened to that exact advice that you just gave, right? So they have to know these things and deal with it and be on top of it, because it's, you know, it's an uncomfortable position for everybody. You know, and we get it in our office, and clients will, what do I do? And my agent didn't tell me. Like, we're always really reluctant to throw the agent under the bus on these things, even though we think, you know, the agent should have told you about it. Those words just don't come out of my mouth easily. Like, I just hate saying that. You know, I like to protect the agent, but my obligation is really to the client. But I'm still trying to do that. So we talk about this in our lawyers meetings all the time. Like we still take an approach. We don't want to just blame the agent and say, oh, you know, the agent's should have told you this. So get the $5,000 from the agent's commission. Like some lawyers would tell their clients to do that. Like the first thing. That's
well, you know, the more important issue is just to, you know, actually deal with the issue at hand as opposed to lay the blame, right? So like we said, your office is always involved to the point where the ink is already dry on the page, right? So the issue is there. So the more important and prevalent issue is, you know, help the client navigate the situation, which is, you know, kind of the priority, right?
Right. And, you know, and bottom line, it's, you know, when things go bad, clients look to play the blame game. It's never their fault. But the reality is here.
In the last webinar as well, right? I mean, when the market goes down and you know, those extension conversations and then the blame the game goes a completely different way, right? When the market moves up, you know,
They want the benefit.
Yeah, and this, you know, the party that thinks they're wrong, all of a sudden, you know, it's not a big deal because the market's moving in the right direction, right? So again, I think if all the agents, you know, follow the rules and do the due diligence and really understand some of these pain points, which is why I wanted to talk about rental items, because, you know, at the end of the day, the reason we're doing this podcast is to really raise the bar in the industry. We both love the real estate industry, you know, and we're so invested in it. And I think this is one of those issues that, you know, there's so many mistakes out there. And I want all the agents out there to really pay attention, and homeowners too. Like you know, sitting on this side of the chair, David, it's really interesting for me to hear your perspective that as a homeowner, you don't even realize what is a rental item, right? And to me, right away, as a brokerage owner, I'm thinking, okay, what mechanisms can I put and what training can I give to my agents to make them overcome that obstacle, right? Because sometimes we assume that, hey, you're a homeowner, you really should know what is a rental item, what isn't a rental item, right? And when we're sitting down and going through that process of going through a listing presentation, you're going to tell me, right? And I just realized after our podcast today that that might not be the most secure way of moving forward, right? So again, you know, going through these conversations and going through these motions is super, super important. And you know, that's where a lot of these mistakes can be found and dealt with.
Yeah, and look, I'm a homeowner like other people are, and if you ask me today what we own and what we don't own, I couldn't tell you. You know, as it happens, there's certain bills that I look after, monthly bills and stuff, and there's certain bills that my wife looks after for no particular reason. It's just evolved into that, and she happens to look after most of the utility bills when they come in. So I wouldn't even be able to tell you, are we paying a rental fee on some of our equipment or not, or is it just the gas bill, or is it like I wouldn't know off the top of my head. But I don't really have to know right now because we're not selling. But if we were selling it, then all of a sudden, then I do have an obligation as a homeowner to figure it out and find out, because that's where the buck should stop. No matter what advice you get from an agent or a lawyer, it really is the seller's responsibility to know and to provide that information, right? But sometimes they don't. We just make assumptions. Oh, I must own that. I must own my furnace. I don't remember, you know, paying a bill or something, but it turns out your wife is paying the bill, so you don't know about it. That's not an excuse, right? You can't you come to a court later and say, oh, I didn't know that I had to pay $5,000 to buy out that contract because my wife was paying the monthly bill and I didn't look at it. Like, you know, you're laughed out of court, right?
But I think the most important thing here to take away is that the question needs to be asked, right? And time needs to be spent addressing those issues upfront. And you know, the other thing that I hate is when a realtor goes and lists a house and the whole process gets done really quickly and fast. Like, sign the paperwork today, tomorrow the house is on the market.
Yeah.
You know, 99 times out of 100, in order to really get that best price and provide that best service, that process takes a little bit of time, right? Going through that due diligence process, prepping the house, making, you know, doing your comparable search, when I was an agent, I even used to take some of my sellers and go tour some of the other houses that are listed, because I always say to them, listen, the buyer is going to be educated. They're not going to come into the first house they see and spend $1 million. They're going to go see 20 properties, right? So as a seller, we need to educate you on this process just as well as the buyer is going to be educated. So, let's go look at your 3 biggest competitor listings and let's compare them and let's talk about that, right? And by the way, agents, that can really help you with pricing your properties, right? And setting expectations with your sellers. Hint, hint, right? We deal with that all the time. Whenever we have really difficult sellers, I always tell my agents, hey, listen, book some appointments, go take them out, educate them, get them to see that, there's other properties that are cheaper, better position, have more quality upgrades, and get their feedback on the ground, and works wonders. So keep that in the back of your pocket. But, that process takes time and it can't be rushed. And again, having these tough questions up front will eliminate a lot of issues when the closing comes.
Right. And I guess the lesson is, it's not enough just for an agent to say, well, here's some comparables. Sometimes you have to show them the comparables. Sometimes it's not enough to see them on paper with the list of features that are included or not included. Sometimes you got to go a little bit further to do that. And I think that's great advice. The other thing is, we were just talking about this. Certain things, when you talk about chattels and fixtures, are a little bit more of a gray area. Is it a fixture? Is it a chattel? Like I had an inquiry this morning about TV wall mounts. Okay. So, everybody's got these big, huge TVs now on their walls and everything. And but they're in these big brackets that are mounted in there. So here I've got a transit. It's a $6.5 million sale of a house, client selling. They excluded the 2 TVs in the house. The TVs themselves are clear in the description of the chattels that these TVs are excluded. We're not closing for another 6-8 weeks, but all of a sudden he's like so concerned because there was a visit and the buyer wants to make sure that the wall mounts from the TVs are staying. And he sort of assumed, well, I'm keeping the TVs, I'm keeping the wall mounts too. But the answer is the wall mounts are bolted in, and those are fixtures, and they're supposed to stay. And if you wanted them excluded, they should have been listed as exclusions from the fixtures. Again, probably on the advice of the agent at the time, because they excluded the TVs, but they didn't exclude the wall mounts. Okay, now I don't know for sure how much the wall mounts cost, but they might be $50 each, $100 each. I'm sure they're good, expensive wall mounts for these big TVs, right? But now he's fretting over this $100, $200 cost on a $6.5 million transaction. Like wherever he's going to go, he's going to take his TVs and so he's going to have to get new wall mounts in his new place because he's going to have to leave these behind, right?
It's always the little things, right? Like it's a big transaction, right? But it's those little things agents bring to the table that really make the difference between an amazing customer service experience, a good customer service experience, and a poor customer service experience, right? And even the little things like I see when TV mounting brackets get excluded, a lot of the times, and this is the homeowner will take the second part of the bracket that's actually mounted to the TV, right? And the mount that's left on the wall is useless without the second, right? So
TV, yeah.
The homeowners, if you're going to leave the mounting bracket, make sure you leave both pieces so the buyer can actually utilize the brackets, and leave all the screws as well. But it's those little things that make a big difference for sure.
Right. And here, when they had the discussion about keeping the TVs, and the agent should have just made it clear to them too. Yeah, you're keeping the TVs, but do you want the wall mounts? Because normally they're going to stay. You're going to have to get new wall mounts in your new house because that's a fixture that should stay. If you really want them, we have to specifically exclude them. And if they would have done that, I'm sure that these wouldn't have been deal breakers at the time.
Yeah.
And it would have been clear. Instead, now 6 weeks before closing, there's emails going back and forth, because he's already exhausted this process through the agents, and now they want the lawyers involved. So how much time are we going to spend on this to try and save them $200 in the cost of wall mounts?
Yeah.
So,
One other issue I really wanted to bring to light today, and I see this happening all the time, is agents love to go over and above to protect their buyer client. And I always see this. I see this a lot of the times in Schedule A. There's a phrase where basically it says that the seller agrees to discharge all liens and encumbrances on closing.
Mhm.
And you know what? I always cringe when I see that, because obviously it's going to be discharged, right? But you have to deal with it in the proper time frame as well, right? And the other thing is Schedule A supersedes everything else in the agreement. So, now the question is, if you have something under a rental item that's registered on title, right? And now we have in Schedule A that seller agrees to, pay, discharge all liens and encumbrances. Well, you just committed the seller to basically paying off that rental item that's registered on title before closing.
Right. Yeah, if it happens to be registered, and there isn't always a registration for those rentals, but if it is registered, you're right. We have to clear title because the buyer is entitled to a clear title with no mortgages on it, no other liens against anything else that goes with the land. Because if it's there, a new mortgage is going to go behind it, or you got to get a postponement, and they're not going to postpone it to the new mortgage. They're going to say, no, the mortgage is going to go behind us because if the new buyer defaults, we want the right to go in and pull that equipment out of the house. So it's the seller's obligation to clean all that up. Okay, buyer's entitled to get the property without any liens or encumbrances on it and against anything that's supposed to be included.
Or even a rental item in this case.
Yeah, or if it's a rental item.
Right. So my message to all the agents out there is just be very cautious when you see that terminology in Schedule A. 9 times out of 10, it won't get you into trouble because the expectation is that buyer is going to receive a clear title. But when you're dealing with rental items that are registered on title, it's dangerous territory that you're navigating. So pay close attention to that.
Right. And the agents should be looking to see what is on title before they do, get a listing out there, before they sign an agreement of purchase sale. You want to make sure who the homeowner is. If people don't remember how they own title. They may have owned title for 15, 20 years. They don't remember if it was Mr. and Mrs. both on title, or was it just Mr. alone for some reason, or Mrs. alone. Like you don't know unless you check. So you've got to make sure you've got the proper seller. So you're checking title. And while you're checking, people don't know how many mortgages they have. I ask clients all the time, how many mortgages are on your property? And they say, oh, we have one mortgage. Oh, do you have a line of credit? Oh yeah, we have a line of credit too. Is it secured by a mortgage on title? I don't know. I don't remember, right? Maybe it's secured maybe there's one mortgage that covers both the mortgage loan and the line of credit. That happens a lot of times too, but it's only one registration. Sometimes it's two separate registrations. Sometimes there's all these other notices of security interest for some of this equipment, the furnace and the hot water tank. So it's a good idea to check to see what's on title so we know what we have to get off title.
Yeah, and I mean, the easiest way for us to do the latter part of that is to send you guys an email and send you guys the property address and the legal description, and you guys always help out and can provide that information to us.
Right. There's a cost to a seller for doing a sub search. The government charges fees for giving the information, but still, it's going to cost $75 or something like that to do a quick sub search to see what's there. But that compared to running into a situation where you didn't do it and there's a notice of security interest registered on title for this equipment and you didn't know about it, and now you've obligated the seller to clear the title, and now they got to buy that out, and that's going to cost them $10,000 to buy that equipment out. It would have been better to spend the $75 and find out.
Yeah. The other thing is 9 times out of 10, when there is something registered on title for a rental item, it usually happens in condominium buildings, and it usually happens in all the apartments, right? So again, not all agents are created equal, and you can't rely on previous listings. but you should take a look at the previous listings and you should see how some of those rental items are being described and listed. Minimum 3 listings. Don't just look at the last sale, because again, you can't rely solely on the previous information that was provided, but it is a good reference point and it's a good starting point as well, just to see, because like I said, like you mentioned, some homeowners don't realize that something is a rental item, and that could be one way to just kind of take a look and see what else is happening in that building.
Yeah, and that could be a discussion for another podcast too. Like, is the information that's in a listing binding on a seller? Because more often than not, people are surprised to know that it's not. Mistakes happen in listings, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. There's exaggerations, but it's not, the information in a listing is not binding on a seller in most cases. So that could be a topic for another podcast.
Sounds great to me. Looking forward to it. David, thank you so much for spending the time today. It was a blast as always, and looking forward to the next podcast. And I think that's a great topic. I think that's exactly what we should continue into.
Okay, we'll do it. Have a good week, everybody. Take care, stay safe, and get out there. Buy some real estate.
Yeah, and get out there, enjoy the nice weather as well. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, bye.
Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market and dive deep to understand the issues affecting buyers, sellers, investors, and businesses. If you love real estate as much as we do, sit back, relax, and gain an insider's edge to the exciting world of real estate. David Gorski is a broker and the owner of Sutton Summit Realty, a powerhouse brokerage providing guidance to over 180 realtors. And David Korman is a partner at Kormans LLP, a respected law firm specializing in residential and commercial real estate transactions, with offices located in Toronto, Mississauga, and Markham.